I'd like to welcome you to this week's cold calling workshop. The topic today is overcoming the postponement objection. And for those of you who are new here, the format is that I'm going to start by giving a scripted presentation, and then we'll do Q&A where you get solutions to your own personal sales and marketing challenges. So if you want to actually use this as a workshop, you're welcome to. In other words, this is supposed to be a workshop, so if you have questions, go to the live link that you see here and ask to come on the stage. You can do that during the presentation if you have a question that can't wait until the end. And the presentation usually runs about 15, 20 minutes. We'll see how it goes today. Anyway, if you want personalized coaching, also you can jump in at the end and we'll debug your process. Okay, so our agenda today. The topic is overcoming the postponement objection. Note on the right side of the slide here is that we have workshops on a whole bunch of other topics. So if you want to see any of them, just let me know. We'll put it on the agenda that's for next week or soon. Anyway, postponement is by far the most common objection there is, and it can come in many forms. That is, they don't take your call. They tell you to call back in a couple of weeks or a couple of months. They just say we're not ready yet, or they say just not now and leave it at that. The problem is you have a payroll to make or a quota to hit or bills to pay, and they won't wait. So what do you do about it? How do you get the prospect to feel a little bit of urgency with respect to saying yes? Or even how do you get them to just say no if it isn't really going to happen so you can go work on another opportunity? For your reference, everything we're going to talk about today is documented in our ebook, The Lead Generation Paradigm, which you can find for free at the link you see here, leadgen.com/free ebook. Okay, that's the end of the commercial, and let's get into it. Broadly, there are three things that prevent most salespeople from being successful, and yes, arguably the same can be said for most marketing programs and marketing professionals also. But we're going to focus on the sales applications of the theory here, of course. The first one is your technique. That is, sales involves technique, which hopefully you know. That's a question of conscious competence. That is, you know what you're doing and you're aware of it. You're using your technique deliberately. But the first question is, what technique are you using? Are you using a formal technique or are you just winging it? If you're using a formal technique, have you been formally trained, or are you just following the book or a bunch of YouTube videos? Is the methodology any good? Has it been proven? Or is it just someone else's tricks of the trade or what you've picked up along the way? And most importantly, does it work for you? Are you able to use it to make as much money as you want whenever you want? And obviously, the when is the big issue we're talking about here. Now, I'm not going to get into a critique of all the different sales programs that are out there. We can do that at another time, other than to say that most of them are pretty awful and they don't work. Anyway, the next barrier to success, and this is directly relevant to today's topic, is why you get a postponement objection and how to deal with it. And that's associated with your value proposition. That is, you have to answer the question, why should somebody talk to you, meet with you, and ultimately buy from you? And if your value proposition isn't clear and compelling, and if it, pardon me, and if it doesn't connect to the prospect's needs, you're not going to sell anything. You're just going to get frustrated and blocked by objections. The final barrier to success is your strategy and positioning. Again, we handle this on other workshops, but these are the things that if you don't get them right, you're going to fail in the market, and you're going to fail with respect to making your sales numbers. But the issue for today is how to get the prospect to accelerate an affirmative decision. So let's review our top-down view of the process. We try to frame all the presentations with this. This is the AIDA model. It's been around since the 1930s. We didn't invent it, but it maps out the key steps in making a sale or even doing an effective marketing campaign. In every case, you have to get the prospect's attention. You have to stimulate their interest somehow. You have to get them to want your product or service, and you have to get them to actually take some action, ultimately to buy, but at least to move the sales cycle forward, and to do so when you want them to do it. We can talk in other settings that you want them to buy at the price you want them to pay. But right now we're talking about the when, getting them to move now rather than later. And it's this process that can be interrupted or delayed by an objection. So let's take this down a level, or at least show you the process that we use to make this happen. We're not going to go into detail on this. As I said, we're not going to go into detail in this today, but suffice to say that building an effective cold call or sales call or marketing program can be a pretty complex operation. The AIDA stuff that we just talked about here is in white, which lines up with your role, which is in blue. That is, you attempt to connect with the prospect to get their attention. You say something that's interesting enough, at least to get them to engage. You ask a bunch of questions designed to qualify them, uncover their needs, build value, create urgency, and so on, and then close them on an appointment or a sale, knowing that they're going to say yes. Easy peasy. What could go wrong? Typically, your ability to move the prospect to the next step in this process gets jammed up somehow, either with an objection or a question, and you have to deal with that. You may have to get their attention, their interest, and even their desire, and you may be able to do that, but then they refuse to take action when you want them to take it. So you're engaged in talking, they say they're interested, they like what you have to say, but I can't do anything now. And they raise an objection that slows the process down. Now, broadly, jumped ahead, sorry. There are 4 types of objections that you can see here. Product often comes across as no thanks, or no, we don't need it. Personal objection, I don't know you, or I don't like you, or I don't like your company. Price, obvious example is it's too expensive, it's not in the budget, I can't afford one. But the big one, 80% of all objections is postponement. It's not now. Call me in so many months. Wait, I can't do this right now. I got other things I'm working on. I got other things on my plate. That's actually 80% of the objections that you run into out there. And if you don't know how to get past that objection, that means 80% of the time you're going to fail. In general, and this is the key insight that you want to take away from this today, is all of these objections are simply a lack of understanding on the part of the prospect, pardon me, about some aspect of your value, usually of the basic intrinsic value of your product or service to them. Often it's a lack of understanding or a lack of awareness of their need for your solution, but many times it's of the qualification that, are they a good prospect? Do they have an application for what you want to do? And they may not see it. But if they're a good prospect, that is, if it's appropriate that they could and should buy your product or service, and you can't persuade them to take the plunge, then that's on you. So what do people usually do when they encounter an objection? Here are the traditional objection handles that people use. The first is my favorite. They used to teach this in Phone Power, and it goes like this. I understand how you feel. Many of our customers initially felt that way, but after buying our product, they found that it was much better than before, and their production was faster, or the costs were lower, or whatever. I got whatever benefits it is that the product or service confers. Here's the thing about feel, felt, found. Anytime you make a declarative statement in a sales call in response to an objection or even in response to a question, the prospect views it as argumentative. They may think you weren't listening, and so it doesn't work. So next, someone, and I won't say who, came up with a different way to handle objections. It's called a reverse. And in this case, it's basically asking the prospect a question in response to their question that pushes the issue back on them. For example, if they say, I can't afford it, you're supposed to ask, what makes you think you can't afford it? Now, if they say, I'm not interested, you're supposed to say something like, what do you think you're not interested in? Or why do you think you're not interested in it? Or some such nonsense. As you can imagine, a lot of people who use this technique get punched in the nose. Another technique is piling on features. This is also known as the yeah, but handle. This is where you tell the prospect all the great things they get if they buy, and especially if they buy today. The problem is that the more you tell them that they get for their money, the more they think you were ripping them off before you offered the extra stuff. At best, it creates price objections. So the more you pile on products or features or non-personalized benefits, the more they're going to object to the price. I can't afford it, or it sounds like it's just too expensive. Anyway, another technique that is to use the what if question. For example, if a prospect says, I really can't afford it, you're supposed to say, what if I could show you a way that you could? This at least uses questioning to regain control of the call, and it's a lot less offensive than a reverse, but the way it's often used is that it's followed up with a declarative statement, and so it fails. If you use it to get back into question asking mode, then it can work to keep you in the game. But if the game you're getting back into uses bad technique in the first place, you've not really helped your situation. Anyway, let's talk about how to get the prospect off the dime. Oh, my little buddy here. These are some old slides, but they work. First, it's important to recognize where most prospects start from. That is, for most prospects, the default mode that they're in when you engage with them is that they don't want to talk, they don't want to meet, and they don't want to buy. Your job is to change that. The way you do that is by asking them questions that are designed to uncover the prospect's needs that would motivate them to want to talk, meet, and ultimately buy. But that's their default mode, is don't meet or don't buy. In other words, you want to get them to see that the value of meeting or buying is greater than the cost of meeting or buying, or even greater than the cost of doing nothing. So you want to tip them from the one side to the other. So how do you do that? As I said, you do it by asking good questions. Now, I'm not going to go into detail on all the different types of questions that there are and what purpose they serve. All that information's in the book. The book has been our training manual that we've used for 30 years for our lead generation specialists to learn how to generate appointments and sell stuff. And so it's been used on hundreds of thousands of calls, and it works. But anyway, all that information's in the book and the other workshops. But I will show you what it looks like when you're done, because focusing on the questions isn't really the point today. It's focusing you on what are you trying to accomplish when you're trying to handle a postponement objection. All right, that's what we want to talk about here. All right. So again, as I said, we start out here, and if you where they don't want to meet, but if you can ask them questions that get them to recognize, admit, and come to terms with their needs, they can end up here. Oops, that's what happens when you hit too many buttons. Okay, that's the end point. Now, if, for example, you're selling, say, sales or marketing consulting services, something we've been doing for quite a while, you could ask the prospect what some of their challenges are with respect to sales and marketing. They might tell you that they're currently getting poor sales results, that competition is winning a disproportionate share of the opportunities, that as a result of their sales performance, they have a turnover problem on their sales team, and that they're getting a very low return on their investment in marketing, and if they don't fix it, they're going to lose their job. Now, you can probably imagine what questions you have to ask to get them to share this misery. Again, if not, download the book or come back on one of our workshops when we talk about questioning techniques. But let's assume that you've uncovered this magnitude of need. Now, it doesn't do any good if it comes out of your mouth. You have to get the prospect to say it. And at least in your opinion, let's assume that it creates an overwhelming case for somebody to meet, if not buy. So you've asked a bunch of questions. You've gotten them to say, hey, we're not making our numbers. We got too much competition. We're losing a lot of deals. I got a lot of turnover on the team. We're not getting good marketing ROI, and I'm going to lose my job if I don't turn this around, right? That should be enough motivation to do something, but it may not be, right? In other words, they have the need. They've admitted they have a need. How do you get them to do something about it now? Because that's the whole point of what we're talking about today. Okay, so it's all about creating urgency. The answer is simple. First, you have to get them to put a cost on each of the needs that they just described. So ideally, some cost that accumulates over time. For example, what's it costing them each month to miss their sales targets? Or how much business are they losing to competition each month? You enter the time component. Or what does it cost you to lose an employee and have to replace them? And how often does that happen? Okay. Or How much are you spending on marketing in a losing effort each month? So let's say they answer those questions and they tell you that they're missing their sales targets by, say, $10,000 a month. They're losing 3 deals a month to competition. They've lost 3 employees so far this year that they've had to replace. They're spending $25,000 a month on marketing, and their MRI is negative. And his boss just told him that if he doesn't turn it around, he's going to lose his job in 3 months. So ask yourself, is it realistic to be able to ask a prospect questions that identify needs, pains, problems, and unmet goals? Is it realistic to ask a prospect to put a cost on those problems? Now, you may have to ask the question and then shut up and wait for an answer, but usually it's not too hard to ask those questions. Just don't get impatient. Let them answer it. And then is it hard to ask those questions in such a way that expresses those accumulating costs over time? And when you do that, here's what you end up with. My favorite. Okay, here we go. This is the fun part. You put a calendar on it. First I said you put a clock on it, which means identify how it changes over time. Now put a calendar on it because things happen on a calendar time, right? So in other words, let's say all in, they're willing to concede that whatever problems they have, it's costing them about $10,000 a month. Miss sales, they may not give you 100% credit for the problems, right? But they're missing sales, they have turnover, they're losing market share, their marketing program is wasting money. So let's say all in, they'll concede that they're wasting $10,000 a month. So you ask them, so after the first month, you've lost $10,000 by not moving forward with what we're proposing here, correct? And what are they going to say? Well, if they went to customer school, they're going to say yes, because they've already acknowledged the value of what you do, right? So then you ask them in the second month, you're going to lose another $10,000, correct? And they say yes. And so you say, so that makes $20,000 cumulatively, right? And again, because they went to customer school, they say, yeah, I guess so. So you ask, and so in the third month, that's another $10,000 down the drain, right? And they say, yep. And so you say what? You ask, so that's cumulatively at the end of 3 months, $30,000, correct? So here's the funny part. You rarely have to ask about month 4. Instead, you ask, at what point does this become something you need to do something about? And that's the killer. That's how you overcome the postponement objection. So there are a couple of immutable laws in business. The first is time passes. It's inevitable. The calendar will click by month. You know, in our business, when people aren't making their numbers, if we don't get the sale right away, and a lot of times it's because we dropped the ball, not the prospect, right? If we don't make our numbers, I know the problem's not going away. There isn't going to be somebody coming along with a magic wand, because we've been around. We know what people are offering to help solve marketing and sales problems. So they're not going to solve the problem. So it's only going to get worse. And if they wait, then when we call them back in a month or two, the problem is worse. But if we want to accelerate it, we go through this process of, if you're missing your number this month, what's it cost you? The end of next month, what's it cost you? What's that cumulatively? And so on. Okay, so the first is time passes. It's inevitable. The calendar will continue to click by. Second, costs will accumulate, whether they're overhead costs or direct costs. Your job is to identify those costs by asking good questions and make the case that waiting will simply make them worse. And that's what creates urgency. You don't do it by rushing them. The calendar will do that all by itself if you show, by asking good questions, how costs that they are responsible for accumulate over time. All right. So that's it. When you're out there in the field, in the market, whether you're marketing, sales, BDR, be empathetic, listen, understand customer needs, articulate your value, ask good questions. And if you have any questions, here's the link to download the ebook. If you need any help, feel free to give us a call at leadgen.com. If anybody's out there and you want to click in and get some free coaching, I'll hang around for a couple of minutes and see what we can do to help.